wrong place here. 19. There we are. There we are. All right, Psalm 19, and I'm going to read it in its entirety, and then we will go through it verse by verse as we have been. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sin. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. This is a very powerful passage in what it is talking about. God's glory is being revealed. Again, in this series, we're looking at Psalms, and specifically several selections of Psalms and how they especially relate to the redeemed. That is, those who are sons of God by choice, by adoption. So let's start with the first portion, verses 1 through 6. Verses 1 through 6 deal with God being revealed through his very creation. And we talk a lot about this based on another passage in the New Testament. What passage there's many, but there's one that people often run to and say that it's obvious that there is indeed a God. It's okay, then we'll get to it. So Psalm 1 through 6, we're going to deal with it here in a moment, one that people normally will deal with. But nature's revelation, the very first part, and that is Psalm 19, verse number 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. So just nature declaring God's handiwork, nature showing that there is a God. For my own part, I went, 22 years of my life and could not recognize just from nature that there is a God. And oftentimes people say, well, it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. So this is not saying, there are certain things that this is not saying. We conclude that everyone should just recognize God from nature. Brother Tharp.
I don't think it's like handwriting in the sky, there is God. But I think that when you recognize God, you see his glory in nature, the way he's created it so that it so benefits us.
Exactly. We shouldn't look at this as, well, everyone's going to just look up in the sky and see that there is a God and say, oh, there's a God, he has a plan for us, he has a son that has been sent to save us. Look, without God's word, we don't truly have knowledge of God. We don't know of him truly. What it is saying is that nature itself points to God. Now, one of the things we should be doing is at least asking the question, right? You look up and there's a question to be asked. You look around, you see trees, you see these structures, you see the land, you see the earth, you see the universe and just the grandeur of it. And there should at least be a question. And this is something that is consistent in man, those that believe and those that don't. They at least ask the question. Brother Tharp.
Well, the question is, why is it all here? Where did it come from? What's my part in it? Now, I did want to it doesn't say God is here, but, and I know this isn't all scientists, but there are some scientists out there who say when they really study it, that as much as they want to believe in evolution and everything, there's a lot of scientists who say there's somebody behind it because things are too complex in a way that it had been designed. It can't have they couldn't have fallen in order because too many things have to be in place at the same time. So, I mean, they call it intelligent design, some people, but I think you can, when you really look into it, see God's hand in things. Now, that's something that a layman, though, is not going to notice.
Yes, well, I mean, from my own, again, I'll talk from my own perspective. There was a reason I would not be an atheist because there were things that could not be ruled out. I just couldn't conclude that there was a God, but I could not conclude that there was not. Most scientists that study cosmology would not side with the idea that too many things had to fall in place for it to happen randomly, mainly because of just the vastness of space. So whatever odds you give, space is that vast. And so for us to maybe be one of a kind, many could acknowledge. But that may be the scale, the scope of the odds of things all being in the right place at the right time with the right mixture in all of this universe. That's what some would counter with from a design standpoint. If your odds are really, really small, but you have enough chances, and in theory, those odds are going to happen. They're going to come up. So if we say it's 1 in a million odds, but we get 1 billion chances, then those are really good odds. It'll happen 1,000 times over according to the odds. So
I'm not talking macro though. I'm talking micro. In the subatomic, you need a microscope to see the kind of things I'm talking about. In the macro, I think that chance could play the part, but it's in the micro.
But even in the micro, it still comes down to that because there's so many different locations. Again, this would be the odd or the argument against intelligent design. And that's okay. That's okay. Like I said, though, anyone should be asking the question. That's the important part here. I agree with you, but there will be an argument. An argument is not a bad thing. An argument means there's a discussion. And that's the key to all of this, is that it's not just everybody's going to look out and say, okay, here's the nature of God. It's that we at least universally are asking the question, wow, we take note of these things. That is a universal aspect of man. We see it in writings, we see it in discussions, we see it in religions, we see it just throughout mankind. So that's the nature of what we're talking about here. Nature reveals something that causes man to take notice, be in awe, and ask questions. And that is what we want. Isn't that what Acts 17 is talking about? That, God has created all nations of the world that they might seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him. The key is we've got to seek. And he's given us enough to spur on that search. That's absolutely key here. So, Psalm 119, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Isaiah 40, verse 26. Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, look, who hath created these things? That's the question. You look up, and that's the question. How did it get here? You may not phrase it as who hath created these things, but how was it created? How did it get here? How did all of this come to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
And when we look at all of human history, it's only been the last, 150 years that we've even started to question that. For most of man's history, that was the question, how did it get here? And they had no idea.
Yes. Yeah, and we still have little idea. I mean, again, we have theories from a scientific standpoint that rule out the spiritual because physical science can't consider the spiritual. That's not physical science. That's not physics. So it will never consider the spiritual. So if all you're going to work with is the physical and physical evidences, we come up with theories, but the reason you have missing links and unanswered questions on all of this is because we're just working with theories. And sometimes we take those as religious fact. They're simply theories. There's a good understanding of gravity. How do I know it's good? Well, we land things on Mars. And without that understanding, we could not. You couldn't even keep something in orbit around the moon. We had to learn that the gravity wasn't consistent. And so it was pulling things down. And so we had to learn that. We have a good understanding of that. And so we expand that out and we look at the Milky Way and we say, well, it must have formed over X amount of time in this way. Read into that. Most of us just accept that. But ask and look into what are the unanswered questions about the formation of the Milky Way. It doesn't match any model. No model works. For just one galaxy, it doesn't fully work. There's some unexplained things, no matter how they try to model it. And so, we come up with other things that say, well, there must be some other forces at play. Basically, I'm saying all this to say there's unanswered questions that people have accepted as complete. These things aren't theory, they're just complete fact. Brother Tharp.
And as much as I respect most science, in the last 2 weeks they think that they've had the theory of gravity wrong and they're re-examining it with some new data.
Well, that comes around very regularly. A lot of times they will come back and say the phrase Einstein was right. That's usually the response. And therefore, see, look, it's reinforcing. But the nature of true science is to challenge anything. And it's only when it comes to religion that we don't like that challenge. We don't like the challenge of science. Science does not like the challenge from religion standpoint because there's a lack of understanding there. There's a lack of understanding on our part in how we argue it, and there's a lack of understanding on their part in their unwillingness to receive that particular challenge. But we'll challenge gravity, and we'll challenge relativity, and we'll challenge anything else. And as long as you have some experiment to show it, we'll accept that. But bring up the challenge of religion, and then it's a problem. Brother Young.
I mean, a fine timepiece is a duplication of the universe. I mean, man has learned, become so smart and learn how to create a fine timepiece. And a lot of preachers use the timepiece as an example that every fine timepiece made, there is a maker behind it. So timepiece is just a duplication of the actual, what is stated in Psalm 19, the universe. So by learning the universe, man is able to create this timepiece, divided into 24 hours and then into minutes and seconds. And they have, by the ingenuity, put mechanical knowledge with what they call it, astrological knowledge together, and make that. And we will not deny the fact that there is a maker behind it.
Indeed. Indeed. Now I'm going to counter that. That fine timepiece works really, really well. Consistently well. Until it goes to space. And it doesn't work well anymore. It's off. The timekeeping is off. Why? Does anyone know? Relativity. The further away you are from a gravitational force, it alters the way that time is kept. And so what did man do to go back and reinforce exactly what you said? Is we studied it and we created, through our understanding, a better timepiece. That's what all of our global positioning, the reason we can get home nowadays, because we don't know directions and no one's ever seen a Thomas guide anymore. These satellites adjust time constantly, and that's how we're able to measure it. It goes right back to it. We didn't say, oh, this just happened. We got in there and created. Now, the question is, what did we really create? What we created was just adapting all of the systems that we see around us. Everything that we base it on, that original timepiece, our more advanced timepieces that deal with the cosmic, all are based on our understanding of something out there. We can't create gravity. As much as I love to watch Star Trek, we can't create gravity.
Yeah.
There's a holdout. But we didn't create any of this. We observe and we say, wow, there is an intricate system. And then we duplicate. Is that really creation, or are we mimicking? I mean, we pat ourselves on the back for our fine timepieces. And without that watch, that, creator of that watch, we would have less fine timepieces. We acknowledge that. Yet we don't acknowledge that we're getting inspiration from a very intricate system. Very intricate system. Brother Young.
Scientists have observed, and discovered the laws, all those mathematical laws, and all those laws. We attribute it as the law of God. But they make anything, they have to have that law first. They know the law first before they make anything or send anybody to the moon. Without those mathematical calculations and laws that they have learned and gained,
Observed.
they will not be able to make anything on earth that we have today. And yet, come to God, we know that when you see a law, there is a lawgiver. But when it comes to God, you say, no, God is not the lawgiver.
Well, they can't, again, and I don't blame scientists from this perspective. If you're a physicist, you're studying physics. But now, as a person, as a human being, let's ask that question. Now, I understand that as a scientist, you're not going to be able to test the spiritual. You're not going to be able to create a scientific experiment with the spiritual. It requires physical observation. That's just a reality. But again, as a human being, denying the even possibility of a God, that is ego, that is hubris. There's no basis for that. There's no foundation for that. So when we at least stay open to the question, and every scientist, every single person who calls themselves a scientist, their pursuit is supposed to be for true knowledge. So they should be open to it, even if it doesn't come in the form of the physical, but rather the spiritual. So there's no excuse for that other than ego. Brother Tharp.
Yeah, I can respect an agnostic, but somebody who's a diehard atheist, they're doing that just as much on faith as we are believing there is a God. Because they don't have proof that there isn't a God. So at least an agnostic is a little more honest.
Yeah, now let me defend the atheist for just a moment. Many times it's through lack of information. Many times. Let's not always assume that they have all of the information, and that's our job. Now they're responsible. Every individual, like we're going right back to our passage here. Everybody can look up and ask the question. Everybody can look around, look down, and ask the question. And so it's our job to seek in truth. Each individual. But now us as the church, as the body, if we have the truth, our work, our mission is to spread that truth. We can only spread it if somebody is seeking, if somebody wants the truth. We can't force it on people. We can do things to stir the waters. We can do things to try to help people along as we have those relationships or opportunities. But that's the key for us, is we're going to spread the truth to anyone. We'll tell anyone. We'll have a conversation with anyone who's willing to receive it. And from there, it's on each individual. Brother Tharp.
As scientists, though, they know that the lack of a positive doesn't prove a negative. They know that. You recognize it as a young man. And yet they will argue and defend and debate the non-existence of God because they can't prove God.
Yes. For some, the scientific process has become a religion in and of itself. Yeah. The belief that the process is a perfect process. I don't debate that it's a good process. I'm glad we have that process for science, for investigating things, physical truths. I'm glad it's a very contentious thing, and we go through a process of proving things. I'm glad for that. But it's the best process we know, and it's been refined over the years. A perfect process doesn't get refined. It's complete. Something constantly being refined is incomplete. If I'm refining a recipe because the first time I made it was bad, it's not complete. If I make it and it's good, is it complete? Well, if I'm still refining it to make it better, it's not complete. But when we treat that process as, wow, this is gold, this is the absolute perfect thing that we could have, the scientific process, then comes pride. And I can't accept that something else is going to explain it, because this process is the perfect process. What is the problem with that process? I've mentioned it before. I've mentioned it many times because we need to know this. It's what is the problem with the scientific process when it comes to understanding God?
You said earlier, it can't see the spiritual aspect.
By design, it is designed not to look at anything other than the physical. It's designed around physics. It's designed around only examining that. There is no knowledge of the spiritual. So it's not so much a flaw in it for its purpose, but when we try to apply it to proving God or disproving God, it's not designed for that. It never was designed for that. And so we're misapplying it. Now, there was a time I didn't know that. Because I didn't know that God is supposed to be spirit. I didn't know the nature of God. That we may not fathom that there are people who don't know. But I can honestly say I did not know any of that until I read it. Brother Young.
But then we cannot deny the fact that beside the physical law, there are other laws of that they govern our morality, and that the Bible we know that there is a spiritual law regarding eternity when there's no more time. So there are laws. So how come the scientists elevate physical law and ignore other laws?
Because we don't have the ability to analyze those things. For example, we've gained a lot of knowledge about how the brain works. And we're seeing that now. I learned about it in 1985. I started doing experiments with AI. And a lot of information was able to be read then. And we have come a long way, but it's not that much further in understanding the brain than what we knew then. We have access to more information, more processing power, and nowadays, I was watching a report that was talking about a study that young people don't make important life decisions without consulting ChatGPT today. That's very disturbing. It's a very disturbing trend. But that's how far we've come with that. We understand the brain so much that people think this is a conscious being. However, what we don't understand and what people don't know that are using these tools, and they're just that, they're tools. What people don't know is that we don't understand consciousness. We don't understand humanity. We don't understand it. So we've mimicked the way a brain works mechanically without understanding how we learn, how we know things from the beginning. We explain it away with theories, but we don't know. We haven't learned that process. Now, those of us who believe in a soul. That soul is eternal. Everything we are is not based on this mechanical device that we call a brain. If my brain is destroyed and I am to be resurrected in a new body, I can't assume that the sum total of me is my brain. If I can no longer access that functioning, does it mean I can't be resurrected? Because we believe in the soul. No scientist can prove a soul. Again, it's not designed to. So why? Why do we ignore those laws? Because our system is not designed to analyze them and prove them. And it's only if we're willing to truly examine just what God's word says and separate what God's word says from our original beliefs, we won't even open the door for it. And so that's what we do. We ignore that aspect of it.
Well, the thing is, we have a legal system full of laws, and then we always tell each other that, we are a country of law and order. So if we ignore all that, you are just like want to defy gravity, just jump off the building. destroy yourself. You know that similar consequences will happen if you have a set of law where everybody respect it. And then if we ignore it, we know that we are heading towards chaos.
Yeah.
This is law. How can you say you cannot approve it?
Well, because what we've done is, again, we've modified that system a bit to say we wrote the laws. For example, we will say there is a universal law because people seem to respect it worldwide. Overall, societies believe that people should not kill other people. Would you not say that there seems to be something greater? Because every society can come up with different laws. You know, we have different laws governing our economic system, our judicial system, different laws, how we pick our leaders, different. Everywhere just came up with different laws. But we seem to all collectively, that doesn't mean each individual, collectively, isn't it a universal law that murder is not a good thing in a society? That points to what you're talking about, right? How did we get there? Well, we're evolved. We're civilized. So we came up with laws. And that's a very natural law for any civilized society. That's how we explain it away. This is not a godly law. It's man in his own wisdom. We have enough wisdom to come up with laws that say we shouldn't murder each other. Now, the problem with that is, left to our own devices, we'll destroy ourselves many times over with nuclear weapons and the like. Our laws didn't keep us from doing that, right? Those of us that came up in the, I was a child in the 80s when we had the scares of, it's 90 minutes, I remember, 96 minutes that we would have warning for a nuclear missile to come over from Russia. We lived in that fear during that particular time. Why? Why didn't our natural law keep us from worrying about destroying each other the world over? Because it's not man's law. It's not man's law that's governing this. There's a natural law against it. We ignore it. We say man created these laws. Every law that we respect, that's what we say. So that's the battle, is we've got to keep showing people God when they're willing to look to God. People do ask the question, and when they ask the question, we've got to be there to try to provide an answer. Have you considered? Have you read? Take a look at this. The one that I was alluding to earlier that we normally talk about, Romans 1:20, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. We often run to this particular passage, and it is saying the same thing. It is pointing to the same thing. It is a perfectly valid passage, obviously, but we do, again, have to understand. I want us to make sure we understand that when we present it to somebody, what it's actually saying. It's not what a passage where you just say, look, you're foolish for not even recognizing and seeing God in all of this. You're not going to win anyone over with that argument. And I've heard that argument. You will not win anyone over. But you can win people over by getting them, spurring on more questions. You want people to keep questioning. That is the most important thing we can do with somebody who would deny the existence of God, is keep them questioning. Brother Tharp.
Just a quick comment. We got to learn to quit slamming the door, because too many of the things we say sound perfectly fine to us, but if you're on the other side, they sound either stupid, ignorant, or combative, and it cuts off dialogue. And we really need to fine-tune how we talk to people who are not believers.
Yeah, some of the ways we talk to people are simply not humble. We're insulting, we're dismissive. And while we don't believe what they believe, we should still approach people with basic respect and decency. That's what our humility should lead us to do. And that won't slam the door. Now, I know many times that's not what we're trying to do, but we do.
We don't do it on purpose.
Yeah, but we need to become more conscious of it. I want to talk about it so that we in the church become much more conscious of it. We should know God's word, but not to beat people up with it, but rather to, what's our job? Persuade people. That's why we need to know God's word, so we can offer persuasive arguments.
And let me qualify that, and I'm not talking just about the Church of Christ when I say that. I'm saying about people who espouse to be Christians. I hear them say stupid things in the news all the time that do more damage than they do good.
Indeed. And I knew that's what you were talking about. I tend to talk more about us, but we acknowledge, again, what people are doing in the name of Christianity. But for us who hold the truth dear, we ought to use the truth properly. Obviously, we can't control what everyone else is doing, because there are people who think that the truth means go bomb a place.
Yeah.
You know, that's clearly, we know that's not what it's supposed to do. So what is it? I like for us to bring it home to us, because the church, in my time in the church, has taken great pleasure, great pride even, in their knowledge of God's word. And pride is not going to do you any good. We should humbly wield God's word, knowing it's not even our word. It's God's word. And we should utilize it properly to persuade. Brother Young.
But do you know why scientists are so sure that science explains everything? Science is the answer to everything. And yet we cannot use science to determine why somebody will pay $10,000 for a first class seat and many will pay $1,000 for a coach. Going back to timepiece, why someone will pay $500,000 just for a watch, where you and I can just use our cell phone to tell time? So has science, probably not to say that we can explain that.
Yeah, but you know, there are attempts to explain it. And the attempts, again, are through quantitative studies. So that's more of a psychology question. And of course, there's a limit to what you can do. Talk to Ashton or anyone else who's more versed on psychology. I'm becoming versed because she talks about things and the things that you can't do. And I'll say, well, why don't we just do that? Because it's not ethical. That would not be an ethical study. So we have some limits on what sort of studies you can create. And so we analyze things, we do experiments, we do statistical studies where experiments may not be appropriate. And through those statistical studies, that's numerical, it's quantifiable. People gravitate toward this. And so you offer psychological explanations. But anytime you start dealing with the psychological, everybody has some variance, some difference to that. So it's, you know, I prefer physics because things tend to follow a predictable path. People don't. So, but statistically, people study that. That is a science. And they go with what they know. So why is it? Because of Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We say that it takes great faith in order to believe some of these sciences, but not faith in the sense that the Bible talks about. Because scientists put more stock in what they can observe than any explanation that's going to come from the Bible. So even where there's gaps, drawing conclusions based on observation is preferable than accepting this written word that someone says a man wrote. We're just going to ignore some of the other anomalies about the idea that man wrote this. We're just going to ignore all of that. And we say, man wrote this. It makes him feel better to believe that it's a pre-conclusion. And so we reject it. Brother Tharp.
I'm going to take the statistical analysis and how many think we'll get out of verse 1 tonight? Because we're almost done. We haven't even got out of verse 1.
That's
But
okay.
there's a lot to talk about, and it's not answerable. Unfortunately, we can't say why people believe in God and don't.
Yes.
We know why we believe in it, but you can't quantify everybody else. So we could really go on about this forever.
Well, to get us out of verse 1
No,
and into verse 2, which we will not even, we won't be able to really discuss. We have to just take a look at Isaiah 6 and 3. And one cried unto another, and he said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Just the idea that it declares God's glory. We're going to just look at verses 2 and 3, but we won't obviously deal with them. We'll have to pick that up next week. Brother.
My observation is it says the heavens. So we haven't decided how many heavens there are and which heavens we are on discussing. So,
Usually the Bible is talking about in terms of 3 heavens, using that same word, and that's why Paul, when he talks about I was caught up in the 3rd heaven, we're talking about there something that is more spiritual than anything else, because we've got the skies, we've got that's beyond our skies, and then we've got the 3rd heaven. So, God is often described as being in heaven, but we're not. Sometimes we confuse it. I misunderstood it before I came to understand God's word, that we're just talking about out there. One of the worst Star Trek movies ever made had God at the center of the galaxy, not even the universe, just the galaxy. Because we misunderstand that. So that is a good thing to delve into, but we won't delve into that this evening. Brother Tharp.
Yeah, and I can muddy the waters even more because I think a good donut's like heaven too. So, there's many more heavens than just the 3.
Well, it is until you find out you're diabetic, and then
Doesn't change it.
But next week we'll pick up looking at this idea of communication without words. It's Brother Tharp mentioned verse number 1. This is another one that you can talk about quite a bit. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. This is the whole idea that the heavens have a way of preaching the gospel to us without ever saying a word. And so that's a whole nother thing. So look forward to spending all day next week on verses 2 and 3. All right, I think we'll close it there. Good discussion. I did think we would get past part 1. There's 3 parts to this. I did think we'd get through part 1 today, and we didn't get through part 1 of part 1. So that's okay though. The whole idea is to have good discussion. But I do have a section that I think is going to take a long time. So I guess I got to prepare for 2 weeks for that one. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the physics class.